next questions for the breakout room, because next we have Israel Chávez with his presentation, and I see he's already with the screen on. So please, Israel, start sharing the screen. The room is yours.
Yeah, you can hear me all right, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Wait. Okay, so can you see my screen now? Is it visible? Yeah.
We can see it.
Okay, and they change, right? Okay, good. So thank you, Oscar, and of course I would like to start with thanking the organizers and especially Don, because I guess he will have something like a jet lag after this, and well, of course, Mila and Claudia and everybody. Yeah, and well, I will be very brief, actually. So, yeah. So the thoughts that I will be presenting to you today are actually a part of work in progress. They don't really belong to my PhD research, but they are rather just like some sort of extension of it. And in some sense, they are like not yet fully developed ideas, but because of this, I would be really grateful for all your comments and criticisms and complaints and suggestions and everything. But even if they are not like fully developed, I decided to present them here because I think that in any case, they can at least point to like interesting directions. So let me just begin with some definitions concerning the terms that are in the title of my presentation. So throughout my talk, by language, I will mostly understand linguistic language. So language in a narrow sense. Now, by communication, I will mostly mean like an intentional transmission of knowledge. And I will be also mostly referring to linguistic communication. Yeah. So in this sense, it can. I will also sometimes understand communication as a sort of establishing of a particular social relation. Yeah. And finally, by change, I mostly mean like a sort of transition from state A to state B. But certainly, the transition is not like I'm going to say the deterministic. And actually, what is called state A or state B are a set of heterogeneous facts that may not transit between states at the same rhythm, or which transit cannot be fully predicted. And in this sense, what I mean by change necessarily presupposes variation. And variation, I will simply understand it as the different manifestations of linguistic form. And now I want, maybe I should make the precision that I am sort of a structural linguist. So when I think of form, I think form in Jamesovian, Saussurean terms. That's what I mean by form. So the main issue that I want to tackle today is Sebioc's claim that language and communication have very little to do with each other. Now, this claim is or was made on the basis of Sebioc's idea, taking inspiration from Stephen Jay Gould and Elizabeth Burba, that speech is an exaptation of language, and that if language came to be, it was only because of its modeling capacity. So according to Sebiok, when it comes to language, communication is somewhat secondary, even if it appears to us as its main function. Now, to be clear, I don't really disagree with this view, but I do think that there are some aspects of language, namely, or one of them, the way it changes, that cannot be fully explained if we do not consider the fact that language is indeed used to communicate. So insofar as we consider modeling as a more general process than communication, it can be safely stated that language is first a modeling system and only later a communicational tool. But so what is exactly meant by modeling here? So in this talk, I will understand model very much in the spirit of Lotman and the Tartu school, well, Tartu Moscow school. Thus, a model can be defined as an analogous of perception which substitutes the object being perceived, but does so following certain rules of pragmatic relevance. Namely, the model will retain the features and the relations between features of the object that is being modeled that are pragmatically relevant. And I will not go further into the notion of model here, but I will just notice that on the notion, on the basis of this definition of modeling, which was to some extent the one that Semiotic was following too, plus Umwelt theory, it can be claimed that when we consider a sign system as a modeling system, we emphasize the fact that said sign system orders perception. But certainly, this is not the only thing that sign systems do. Indeed, on the basis of such ordering of perception, sign systems might also enable practices. And thus, sign systems can be regarded from either one of these functions. Now, by practice, I mean, following Luis Prieto, an intentional transformation of an object in order to produce another object, an intentional transformation by a subject, let's say, of an object. Now, notice that the object being produced can either be a material object, as when we build a bookshelf out of good wood planks, or a mental object, precisely as when we try to convey a certain message. Thus, communication can be considered as a practice, but because of its specific nature, it can be useful to have a specific, special designation for sign systems, in as much as we regard them as enabling that specific practice of communicating. So I will borrow a term from another semiologist and linguist, very closely related to Prieto in theoretical terms, who is Eric Buissant. And I will refer to sign systems when they are regarded as enabling communication as semic structures or semis. And this is like sort of fortunate, because I think that if I do this, I don't really alter too much, or maybe not at all, the sense in which Buissant coined this term, semi. Now, let me insist, just for the sake of clarity, that I am not claiming that there are two kinds of sign systems, modeling systems and semic structures. What I am saying is that depending upon the way we look at them, they can reveal a prominence of one or the other function. And let me notice as well that I do not know how to call the genus to which semic structure belongs. I don't know how to call it. My first idea was to label it simply as semiotic structure, but maybe that is not so accurate. But in any case, in this talk, I will only be concerned with sign systems in as much as they can be regarded as semic structures. But notice that semic structure is just a specific case. There are certainly a lot of other practices being enabled by sign systems besides communication. Because, as I said earlier, modeling is a more general process than communication, and thus, to be consistent with what I said before, ordering perception would be more general in some sense than enabling practices. If a sign system is used to communicate, then we can be sure that it is also a modeling system. But if a sign system is used to model, then we cannot assume its semic character. Thus, for instance, if there are sign systems that allow birds to navigate and move in space, they could be thus regarded as modeling systems, but its semic character would remain to be proved. An alarm call, however, if it is considered as semic, then automatically it's also considered as modeling system. Now, what I have said up to here, it can be seen as trivial. And from one point of view, in order to act upon, I mean, it might seem trivial because from one point of view, in order to act upon the world, we need to categorize it. And thus, ordering perception can be seen as logically previous to acting upon the percepts. But it seems to me that the distinction, I'm sorry, it seems to me that the distinction between these two functions has a little bit more to it. So in the specific case of modeling systems and semic structures, I still don't know about the other species that are included in the genus to which semic structure belongs. We can pose a different constitutive movement. Now, the main movement taking place in semic structures is connotative, whereas the main movement taking place in modeling systems is metalinguistic. Now, let me explain this. I think that the real interesting part of the tradition of semiotics that developed from Saussure is the way in which it addresses the enchainment of sign systems. So I mostly agree with other scholars like Trabant and I guess Eco to some extent that in the Saussurean tradition, the notion of interpretant is not lacking, but it is somehow there. Yeah, so now what I mean by a constitutive movement here is precisely the way in which a sign system is linked with another. So my proposal is that, because I assume following the main tenets of Saussurean linguistics, that entities are not independent from the relations in which they take part, but they are constituted in the relations themselves. I think that when we consider a sign system as a semic structure, the way it is linked to other structures is via a connotative movement. But when we consider a sign system as modeling system, the movement linking it to other sign systems is a metalinguistic one. Thus, in the case of language, inasmuch as language is considered as an expression, it can be regarded as a semic structure. But inasmuch it is considered as a codifying system, it can be regarded as a modeling system. So this last statement seems to be very much in line with Lotman's understanding of language as modeling system, but it moves away from Lotman in that inasmuch as language codifies, I don't think it can be primary, but secondary. And thus I agree with Semiotic in this last respect. Now, I would like to illustrate these ideas and hopefully make them more understandable to you via an example. So I am mostly interested in language change and variation. So my example will revolve around this. And I think, well, I will say this at the end. Now, let us consider the case of Spanish rhotic sounds. Now, for the sake of my argumentation, I will be simplifying a lot of this, but it seems to me that maybe it's enough to say that, well, in Spanish, there are two rhotic sounds, a flap and a trill, or a simple vibrant and a multiple vibrant. Typologically, it seems that this is rather uncommon. And the phonological explanation of these phonemes has been and remains to some extent a matter of debate. So for some linguists, there is actually only one phoneme with different contextual realizations, and the explanation of why the realizations are different are very, very different. For others, it's completely another story. So, well, it seems to me that in determining the phonological content of a phoneme, it is needed to look at the phonic substance. So it is needed to look at variation. For if substance manifests form, then the variability might bespeak of the underlying constancy. Now, within structural phonology, Leopoldo Baliñas proposed some years ago a phonological system of Spanish in which the phonological content of the two vibrants can be defined by the features tense and continuant. The trill will be tense and continuant, and the flap would be tense and interrupted or not continuant. So the phonological system proposed, and it seems to me that the phonological system proposed by Baliñas functions very, very good in the sense that it allows us to explain why Spanish rhotics change or vary like they do. So here is a partial map of the different realizations of Spanish rhotics. Notice what is indicated by the orange marks. The allophones seem to indicate some constraints on the field of dispersion of the rhotic phonemes. Namely, fricativity seems to be an important, I will say, acoustic feature. But fricativity is, under this view, but a substantial correlate of the phonological traits tense and continuous. Thus, Valinius would be right in putting the multiple vibrant in the tense continuum series, along with the other fricatives. Moreover, the allophones seem to have a tendency to be voiceless, and in some cases, as when they are in a cluster, the simple vibrant can also become fricative, as in the case of Costa Rica. There you can see it. It is this. If you see it is here. Yeah. Now the most extreme case is Puerto Rico. I think Puerto Rico. Yeah, it's. Okay, it's here. It's there. Yeah. It is very extreme because the multiple vibrant can become a fully velar fricative or even a uvular rhotic. So it's also interesting to notice the pre-aspiration present in many countries. And yeah, now it is also true that among the different variation of Spanish liquids, because R and L are yeah, kind of, they come together, kind of. So it is true that there is also a neutralization between the liquids. And there are cases when the rhotics become sort of approximants. They acquire like more vocalic qualities. But this may be explainable because they are sonorants. And just for the sake of argumentation, and I know this is kind of tricky, I will not deal with that. I will just focus with fricativity here. So now, what does this example tells us, or how is it connected with the rest of my exposition, with what I was telling you before? You may ask that, and yeah. So my thoughts are the following. It seems to me that it can be said that a phonological system becomes organized or established on the basis of perceptible acoustic features. But inasmuch as we also use a phonological system when we utter sentences, those perceptible features necessitate articulatory correlates. Now, what I am trying to propose is that in a certain way, we know that a phonological system is semiotic. This, I mean, if we agree with Jacobson. Now, and we know that it is a part of a science system, but it might be that in some sense, even this phonological system as such could be regarded as a science system itself, if we consider form as a sign of substance. And I know that this might be problematic, but well, now if we do that, then we can we can regard it both. We can regard a phonological system as modeling system or as semic structure. So inasmuch a phonological system deals with perceptible acoustic features, it could be regarded as a modeling system. And inasmuch as it deals with articulatory correlates of those perceptible acoustic features, it could be regarded as a semic structure. Thus, the need to differentiate between signifiers in uttering, it would be largely semic, and the need for recognition and identification of signifiers would be largely like a modeling process. So let us notice that this last remark calls for a clarification. So it is possible that even if from one point of view ordering perception seems to be logically previous to acting upon the percepts, from another point of view, the reverse is the case. So Prieto, for instance, insisted that categories, he calls them classes, are logically previous to the concepts they realize. So this is tantamount to say, in our terms, that to enable practices is logically previous to ordering perception, because it is only in as much as we, or any other animal at least, recognize that something can be used in a practice, that we look to establish the concepts that such thing realizes. It is, we aim to determine the comprehension of the class to which such thing belongs. But notice that this would not necessarily entail that semic is logically previous to modeling. For semic structures, remember, are but a kind of practice-oriented structures. It would simply entail that modeling arises from practice. And this would seem to be in agreement with the Euskalian influence in Sebeok's notion of modeling. But let me go back just very quickly to the Spanish rhotics. So we know that in passing from Latin to Spanish, phonological quantity was lost, and long consonants became short consonants. However, they were subjected to different processes. So occlusive voiceless consonants were shortened without too much trouble, and for the voiced ones there was a process of lenition, and yeah. But for sonorants, something different happened. So you can see on the left bottom left part of the slide. So for sonorants, the long ones became palatalized, except for R, which became and the simples, they remain the same. But it is important to notice that the bilabial nasal became one sound. So a large M and the simple M became one phoneme in Spanish. And Ralph Penny, he claims that this was due to the functionality of the opposition. So it was not that functional. So it was affordable to lose it. So my point with this is that it would seem that when we explain, or when we try to explain variation, it's more useful to regard language as modeling system. But if we aim to explain change, it might be more useful to regard it as a semic structure. So this might be precisely why, I'm sorry, I will say something before. The point here being that when explaining language change, it would seem that the leading voice is given to the necessity of maintaining the differences between signifiers, or between phonemes, but phonemes only exist as composing signifiers. Thus, it seems that when it comes to language, if we aim to explain variation, it is more useful to regard it as a modeling system. But if we aim to explain change, it might be more useful to regard it as a semic structure. This might be precisely why it is more useful to think of the phylogenesis of language in modeling terms. However, it seems that modeling could also be useful in explaining change if we consider the metalinguistic movement that modeling has at its core. For indeed, the loss of quantity in Latin was due to a change in its prosodic features. The change in the prosodic features brought changes at the phonological level, and these changes brought changes at the syntactic semantic level, as the loss of cases, the system of cases, for instance. Thus, the changes on the expression substance reorganize its form, and this new form acts upon the form of the content, and via its form acts upon the substance of the content. So I would like to point out that this proposal is somewhat running parallel with what Tyler has termed retroaction in his thesis. But it seems to me that the main difference between what I am saying here and what he's saying in his thesis is that I don't assume a direct influence of substance upon substance, but I make this influence pass through form. So to conclude,
just a reminder.
Yeah.
We have 5 minutes left for discussion.
Oh,
however, if you really need some minutes, you can finish and we can discuss afterwards.
yeah, I will finish just very quickly. So
yes,
to conclude, let me just point out that I do not see that my observations are going against Sebeok's view. They at most stand somewhere in between Lotman and him. For inasmuch as language is a semic structure, it can be the expression. It can be the expression of other sign systems, and inasmuch as language is a modeling system, it can be the content of other sign systems. Thus, language turns out to be completely embedded in a hierarchy of sign systems. It is culture, but it is not the primary modeling system in any sense. So the next step of my research would be to explore the relationships between of language within the whole of culture, following these distinctions between ordering perception and enabling practices. But that will hopefully be my topic for next year. So thank you.
Wonderful,
Yeah.
thanks. So yeah, we still have some 4 minutes for discussion. I see virtual claps, real claps. Yeah, so no questions. Okay, maybe I have one.
Yeah.
So what do you think came first? Syntactic habits, semantic habits, or pragmatic habits? Linguistically speaking, what is the driving dimension of language? Ontogenetically speaking, what needed to exist first? Syntactics?
I'm not sure. So I think the problem is that it is some sort of like an unresolvable tension. But I actually very much agree with the previous presentation by Eugenio. And I think we are saying kind of the same thing in some sense. At least because it seems to me that he was also putting some emphasis on practice. He didn't call it practice, but he was talking about movement and articulations and bodily things. But yeah, maybe I would say that in some sense it is pragmatic in as much it needs to fulfill something. But I would think that it is, yeah, this kind of tension and almost like retroaction, as Tyler would put it. Yeah.
Speaking of Tyler, Tyler has his digital hand raised, so please.
Hello. I just want to say the slides, your slides, those handwritten slides are the most beautiful thing that I've ever seen in a conference presentation. And I just want to ask you, how long did it take you to write that presentation?
No, it didn't take that long. The drawing was complicated, but yeah.
Yeah, the phonological map of South America and Central America, that was it looked like hundreds of hours to me.
No, it was cool. But thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you like it. I think.
Please, Peter,
yeah.
go ahead.
Hi. You know, it could be both. And I think it's helpful to think about the cognitive psychology and the possible underlying neural. We need to do abduction on possible neural substrates of both language and communication as a representational system, composable representational system, and a communicative system. And you know, there is this notion of a language of thought that's underlying, or conceptual dynamics that are underlying linguistic productions, of which the linguistic productions are sort of an offshoot. We can think about as fast as we can speak, and we do that almost effortlessly. And the difference between the two is that our concepts are linked to, are distinct from the words that we express, but they're also linked to the lexical nodes. So there are ways of thinking about language, not either a representational system versus a communicative system. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it a lot. Yeah, thank you. It gives me like some food for thought, as they would say. Yeah, but I think I don't want to step into anybody's time. So, and I think my time is up, right?
Yes, just in time. So last but not least,